Welcome to the Cho'gall encounter. Okay, let's start describing this fight by looking at the corruption counter that appears when you initiate this encounter that measures corrupted blood. This fight is all about corruption, or more to the point, the avoidance of it. There are various effects coming your way that will increase your corruption level, and I'll describe those a bit further on. The bar itself is split into 4 at 25, 50, 75 and 100%, with each quarter giving you a different debuff. From 0 to 25% corruption, you don't actually gain a debuff, but something that's worth mentioning here is that all the way from 0 to 100%, each stack of corrupted blood will enhance the damage of one of Cho'gall's Phase 2 abilities by 2%, so it's imperative that you reach Phase 2 with as few stacks as possible. At 25% corruption, you gain Accelerated Corruption, which is a dispellable debuff that applies 2 more stacks of corrupted blood every second for 60 seconds. Obviously, dispellers need to be fast, so this is a level you will most likely reach. At 50% corruption, you gain Sickness, which causes you to vomit in a 5-yard frontal cone, damaging other players for about 40k and applying a further 5 stacks of corrupted blood. At 75% corruption, you gain Amalgamation, which is basically a growth out of your back that periodically shoots shadow bolts at other players in your raid. And at 100% corruption, you're transformed into a faceless one. You receive 100% less healing, but are able to cast spells instantly for double damage. I'm also listing here briefly the corrupted blood stacks given by various effects I'll be describing shortly. Just pause the video if you want to read it properly. Okay, so bearing all this in mind, let's start the encounter. Our raid composition for Cho'gall currently stands at 2 tanks, 2 healers and 6 DPS. This is tight on healing, I know, some teams take 3, but we found with judicious use of Divine Hymn and Hymn of Hope from a Shadow Priest, coupled with Innovates at the right time, you can reduce your healing team down to 2. We engage Cho'gall, place him outside the inner polygon, face him away from the raid, and have everyone positioned directly behind him. The reason for this is Cho'gall periodically uses an effect called Conversion, which affects 2 players. These players begin to worship Cho'gall, each providing him with 1 stack of a buff called Twisted Devotion. Twisted Devotion increases Cho'gall's damage by 10%, so you need to interrupt pretty quickly. Whilst everyone is standing together, the worshipping can be easily interrupted by AOE effects that disrupt channeling effects such as spheres and stuns. I even use Dragon's Breath if I stand at the back, which stuns the target for 3 seconds. You've got to interrupt this as soon as possible, so make sure you're on it. Now, Cho'gall will alternate between 2 types of attack. These types are dependent upon which set of orders he's currently using. The 2 types of order are Flames orders and Shadows orders. Both are initiated by the summoning of a flame or shadow creature surrounded by energy that it pulls into him, and you can clearly see it. Flames orders cause an addition of 20k fire damage to his attacks, plus the periodic spawning of fire patches in the room. Healers need to be extra aware on the tank, and players move off the spawn patches. Shadows orders, however, cause Cho'gall to gain a shadow damage AOE that hits everyone in the room when he attacks. Cho'gall himself has an ability called Fury of Cho'gall. Cast on his primary ag target, he blasts the target with 30k physical and shadow damage. This also leaves a debuff that increases damage taken by these damage types by 20% for 45 seconds. Clearly, when he uses this whilst under shadow orders, your healers need to be on their toes even more. Tank swapping is also needed here, but be careful when it comes to the off-tank picking up the adherent. Cho'gall will also summon Corrupting Adherents, funnily enough. Spawn locations are the left and right alcoves, starting with the left, always the left. He will summon these roughly every 60 seconds, and after the first one dies, which leaves a pool of black sludge on the floor, the timer for the next begins. You have to kill these as soon as possible, because 30 seconds after each is summoned, Cho'gall will cast Fester Blood, affecting both living and dead adherents. For any adherents that are still alive at this point, they will start casting a Shadow AOE effect every 2 seconds, hitting the raid for about 45k damage. This effect will also apply Corrupted Blood. If you ever see this effect, then you're taking too long to position and kill the adherent. The effect on those that are dead is to spawn 5 congealed blood of the old gods from each sludge corpse. I'll just call these slimes for now. Now when each adherent is summoned, whichever off-tank is available quickly picks them up and carries them to the stairs at the back of the room. Positioning is crucial here, as slimes will be spawning from that location shortly. To keep all slimes spawning from the same location, each adherent should be killed as close as possible to the previously killed one. The idea is to maximize the distance of these sludge corpses from your raid, so you have enough time for range to kill the slimes before reaching the tank location. You could in theory use any single location within the room to do this, but the stairs offers the greatest distance from the raid, and you wouldn't want to use alcoves anyway, as the sludge corpses cause 15k damage on death, plus providing 5 stacks of corruption per second. Also, if the tank can move away just before that death, that'll help with their stacks as well. The Adherent itself has a few further abilities. First of all is an effect called Depravity. This effect hits every raid member for 22k shadow damage and applies an amazing 10 stacks of corruption. Aside from standing in sludge, this is the biggest corruption causing effect and as such has a priority to be interrupted. Seeing as ranged will be the first to target, have a ranged ready to interrupt the first cast, whilst melee can take care of subsequent casts. Just to be clear, you've got to interrupt this. The cast time is 1.5 seconds, so make sure you're on it. The Adherent also sprays corruption in a frontal cone, which inflicts 35k shadow damage and applies corruption, another reason to kill them as quickly as possible. The final ability of the Adherent is called Corrupting Crash. The visual effect is identical to the Faceless Horror's ability in Ulduar, except a swirl on the floor appears indicating where it will land, and if hit with it, a player will be damaged for 45k shadow damage and receive 10 stacks of corruption, so just dodge it, no excuses. All in all, you should be aiming to kill about 3 Adherents, 4 if your DPS isn't quite there yet. So then, back to those slimes. When Fester Blood is cast, slimes spawn, 5 for each sludge corpse. Any slowing or snare effects are welcome and should be used, Frost Trap in particular. Anything to increase the time it takes for them to reach the raid. Kill them as soon as possible, because the more DPS time you have away from Cho'gall, the more Adherents you will face. If the slimes attack a player, then each attack causes 2 stacks of corruption, so switch, get on them, kill them, get back to Cho'gall as soon as you can. And that's basically phase 1. Rinse and repeat until the boss hits 25% health and then you'll enter phase 2. Just for an extra note at this point, if the phase transition occurs while slimes are alive, the slimes will still need to be killed after the transition has occurred. However, if an Adherent is still alive, the Adherent will actually fade away. Judge this for yourself, but as we demonstrated in this fight, you can tank the Adherent without DPS into phase 2 given the right timing. Right, so phase 2. This is essentially a DPS race. We tried positioning him against the wall to begin with, thinking there would be less distance between spawned creations. In actual fact, this made matters worse and actually distanced the creations further apart, so now we choose to tank centrally. Cho'gall himself continues to cast Fury of Cho'gall with the same effect as before, however he gains an ability called Corruption of the Old God. This ability inflicts 5k damage every 2 seconds to the whole raid and applies 1 stack of corruption. Now this is where your previous stacks of corruption come into play. The lower you manage to keep them, the less healing you will need and hence the more DPS time your raid will have. Cho'gall now, more importantly, summons something called Darkened Creations. 4 of these creations will spawn in 10 man, 10 in 25 man. These creations have DPS priority and must be burned down as soon as possible. They cast Debilitating Beam, which is a channeled spell causing a reduction in damage and healing by 75%, 5k damage per second, and 1 stack of corruption. To kill these, don't worry about following an MA particularly, just burn down what you can as soon as possible. Ranged interrupters, if fast enough, should interrupt the beam they cast, but focus on damage more than anything. These creations will be spawned roughly every 30 seconds, so like with the slimes, kill them as fast as possible to decrease potential corruption stacks and hence increase DPS time. They always take priority, even though in this vid I did ignore them on the last spawn, but we won't go into that. And that's about it really, so phase 2 repeats like that until either the boss is dead or grinning at your heavily corrupted corpses. All in all, I think this is a great fight. I hope you do well, and the best of luck to all of you. Ta-da!
What madness have we wrought? Not yet enough! Now they see the darkness! Their eyes are open! Brothers!